And the theme, which was set up by the staff, was the puzzle of life, feeling free to be me. So it was, how do we really discover who we really are, who we're called to be in God, who is my true self? And as we establish that, then how are we free to be it in the world? And what are those things that empower us to really live out of our true self and not just have that be defined by other people? And we looked at that through a variety of scriptures, through the blind man, Bartimaeus, through Saul's conversion, through Zacchaeus, through Tabitha, and then even through some other skits later in the week with various Bible passages. And I think, to me, this is not just a question that we reflect on in our youth, but no matter what age we are, we continue to reflect on that question, right? How do I truly be myself in the world? How do I truly live out what God has called me to do? So I think these scriptures can be relevant to all of us as well. How does Jesus empower us and enable us to be our true selves? And one of the activities we did, after we did Zacchaeus and we did the skit up at West, and then I had the middle schoolers to do an activity in a deeper Bible study with. So I had the middle schoolers get into partners and pick who was A and who was B. And A got to go first. And A got to be the tall person, and B got to be the short person. So if they weren't literally shorter, they had to walk around on their knees or whatever. And A got to boss B around. Now, I told them you couldn't do anything where you would hurt yourself. You can't run your partner into a wall or do anything like that. And you have to remember that I'm going to yell switch in a few minutes and you're going to be the B person. So don't do anything to others that you would not have them do to you. And it was great. The kids had a great time. They had a lot of fun. And then we came back all together and I said, okay, what was it like to be the A person? It was fun. You know, oh, I felt empowered. I felt, you know, on top of the world. What was it like to be the B person? Not as much fun. I felt kind of powerless. And we reflected on that. We reflected how we each have a certain kind of power or a certain kind of influence, even if we don't feel very powerful. And the question is, how are we going to use that in the world? We each have the option of using our influence for good or for ill. And God encourages us to really find that true self, who we were called to be in God, and to use that in a positive way, which helps us feel tall rather than feeling small. We can all get in those places no matter how old we are, where we might feel ashamed or embarrassed or small. Or we have those places where we feel tall, we feel empowered, we feel like we're strong, we're able to do things in the world. And there are certain times when circumstances in our life might come around to make us feel small or whatever, but normally we try and look at those support systems, those other things in our life that can help us feel tall and be in our leadership in the world in a healthy way. So I noticed this progression of Zacchaeus from small to tall throughout this particular scripture passage. And I want to just highlight a few things that I think go into making that happen. First of all, we notice in the story that because Zacchaeus is short, he's actually blocked by the crowd. We might imagine that there were more people than just Corey and Lorene standing there. And Zacchaeus is blocked. He can't get to Jesus. The crowd is literally blocking him. The crowd, in a way, is keeping him back because of their judgments on him. And it would be easy for Zacchaeus just to sink into his small self and say, I guess I'm not good enough. I guess I'm nobody, and get frustrated because he's blocked. But what we notice is Zacchaeus' eagerness. He really is eager. He's determined to see Jesus. It says he ran to get up to the sycamore tree. So I love it because he's kind of boxed into a place where we might think I have no options. But Zacchaeus is able to think of a third option that other people might not think of. And he sees this tree and goes, wow, that's something I can do. And he climbs up the tree, and from there he has a higher vantage point than just his emotions that would kind of keep him down. He is able to see, and then Jesus is able to see him, and Jesus connects with him. So first of all, we might think in our lives, are there places, are there things that we run into that either make us feel small or that hold us back? Or that when we look at our community and society at large, we notice can hold people back. Institutions that might not always be helpful. Institutional racism that plays a part in our culture and our world. Laws that favor some people or some groups of people over others. Or things that we might encounter when we are out in the world. Or even our own internal inner critic. Sometimes we can be our own worst enemy when our own thoughts and feelings or sense of imperfection or whatever it is can block us from that connection with God's love. If we feel that way or we feel frustrated, then we have to remember Zacchaeus. We have to remember Zacchaeus' eagerness, his determination to rise above the fray and to find a better way, to find a third way, to find a third avenue that others hadn't thought of. The other thing I notice is what a great example Jesus is of being truly free to be himself. That's what I love so much about Jesus, because it happens again and again and again and again in all the different stories. And we notice, one, that Jesus is so sure of who he is, he doesn't need to prove anything to anybody. He doesn't need to impress anybody. And when he comes up and the crowd tries to sway him, hey, you're new in town, think you should boost your career, Jesus says, thanks, but that's not what I'm about. Because he's clear about who he is, he's clear about his vision, he's clear about his call. So he doesn't have to be swayed by the crowd. And as we find that place in ourselves, we can act out of our leadership too. I also notice, what I love about this passage is that Jesus singles Zacchaeus out from across the crowd. There's so many times when people are coming to Jesus, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. But here, it's Jesus that says, Zacchaeus, I see you. I'm coming to your house for dinner. He actually breaches etiquette, then as well as now. Invites us over for dinner. But he initiates. He sees something in Zacchaeus, I think. I think he sees something in his heart, perhaps, that knows it's pliable and open. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so eager. And he invites himself over for dinner. And there's something about that initiating, Jesus initiating, that transforms Zacchaeus. And I think it's Jesus' acceptance of Zacchaeus. He doesn't necessarily condone what he's doing, but he accepts him. He accepts his core. He accepts who he is as a person. And that changes Zacchaeus. Then we see Zacchaeus go from small to tall. We see Zacchaeus kind of literally getting bigger in stature in a way, because he comes into more of himself, into more of his leadership. He finds there's something he can do to give back, to make amends. And then he ends up giving back and being a blessing to the community. It changes his whole life. That's what Jesus' love and acceptance can do for us. And in us fully receiving that, I think we can do for others. There was a devotional booklet that the youth and leaders put together. And there was one story that touched me really deeply that's anonymous. I think it happened a couple of years back. And it's about one Cameron House youth talking about his time at West and coming there as a camper and being a freshman, not knowing what changes were coming ahead of him in high school. And he's tapped by his leader to speak at Vespers. And some of you have know Vespers is the evening worship service, and a youth usually leads and usually speaks during that time. And he describes how anxious he was about having to speak. And he thinks about it. He spends all day in the field for a couple days trying to think of what to say. And he actually has some feedback from his commission that's a little bit challenging for him to hear at first. So then his leader comes over and tells him that it's going to be okay, and gives him this piece of paper that's folded up, and he says, I want you to read this once you're, he says, on stage, or once you're up front leading. I don't want you to read it until you're in the middle of your speech in Vespers. So he gives him a piece of paper and he walks away. And he says, the time of Vespers came, and I couldn't sit still through nervousness. It was my turn, and I stood up and began. Everything became a blur to me, but there were a few words that linger in my mind. I spoke about my sister, my club group, and what my club members had shared earlier that day, and I broke down and cried, and I was embarrassed. All eyes were on me, and I didn't know what to do. So I thought of the paper that my leader gave to me, and I finally opened up and read it. And it said, ever since you've come to our group, I've always accepted you. I whispered thank you and was able to finish my story. And when I finished, my sister gave me a big hug, and the group gave me a big hug, and it was the most comforting hug of the night. That week at West, the day of thinking and the night at Vespers shaped me into who I am now. I feel stronger and more comfortable at Cameron House and feel like I now want to give back to the community. The theme for the night was acceptance, and I sure feel more accepted now. We never know what those little acts, those little random acts of kindness will do to make a difference in someone's life. And I think for so many, there is a hunger, a need to be accepted on a deep level. So how do we really receive that? How do we first receive God's love and acceptance in our lives? And then as we see that, be mindful of the little things we can do to help others walk tall. This youth leader was able to help his camper walk taller with a very simple note that simply said, I accept you. How can we have those eyes to see where there is a need, it may be very subtle, and a word or a kind gesture or a help can help somebody else feel tall and strong that day. We might think of that on an individual level. We might think of it on a community and corporate level too. Where are the ways that we as a church can partner and help others feel tall? We heard last week from Norman and the call kind of from CCDC to continue to be involved in the community and the needs of the community. And he brought forward an initiative that's going forward in November, and I need to research it more. I can't really speak about it. I haven't had the time to do that since Norman spoke. But it gives us perhaps the opportunity to help homeless people on the street walk a little bit taller. People who obviously feel very small. That by a law that would allow them to have access to the streets during the day when they need it. That is just one example. There might be others. Certainly, I think our partnership with Cameron House is one of those areas. Because what I see, and I can tell I am just beginning to scratch the surface of being able to really appreciate the impact that these programs are having. And I'm filled with stories of youth that I got to hear and seeing them, seeing how their lives have been transformed, seeing how they've gone from being small to tall, and knowing that that continues to happen through social services, through Yolanda and others who work with domestic violence, through the bilingual youth program, through the young program, through the young adult program, all of these. We have an amazing partnership already. And I hope that in our time together, this is a time that we can continue to refresh that, recommit to that, ask, how does God want us to continue to use that and live that out in a new way? And we're working in our PCCCH partnership meetings to revise our sort of joint mission and vision statement. We want to bring that to everyone. And we hope that this can be a time when we can really revisit that and celebrate how we can help each other, help others walk tall in the world. So I just invite us to reflect on that today. Where are those places in our own lives where we might even feel small sometimes? What do we need? What kind of support do we need to help empower us? And how can we receive Jesus' love and acceptance on a deep level so that we can share that and help empower others to walk tall in their own lives? May God continue to bless us as we reflect on God's word.